On this episode of the DTVC podcast, I've got Tom Jolliffe and Nate Shepka on to talk about their newest film, The Baby in the Basket. So that movie is going to be released in the UK and the United States on both DVD and video on demand on February 17th, so definitely keep an eye out for that. And then also for our listeners in the Philippines, which I don't know how many we have, but I know we have some, the movie's in the theater right now, so you can actually go see it in the theaters, which is really cool way to support indie films. But when I got to do that last year with Cinderella's Revenge, it was a lot of fun to go see a movie that's, one that normally would be direct to video, see it in the theater, be able to support an indie creative like that, which again, Tom Jolliffe wrote Cinderella's Revenge as well. So definitely go check that out if you get a chance. If not, of course, for our listeners here, February 17th in the UK and the United States, check out The Baby in the Basket. But this conversation that I have with Tom and Nate is really, really fun conversation. We avoid spoilers, so you can listen to how they're talking about things. It's really more about sort of just talking about their inspiration for what led to them, making decisions that they made, performances that they got from different members of the cast. Really great conversation there, and I think it's a movie definitely everybody should be checking out, so definitely do that. Stay tuned for the review, too. I'll probably get up a written review in the near future. We'll talk a little bit about the written reviews on the site here in a bit, but stay tuned for that as well. Then next week, we've got Freddie Young from Full Moon Reviews on. We'll be looking at Death by Temptation. So, a movie that I've been meaning to do for a long time, one that he had seen somewhat recently, but had been wanting to talk about on a podcast like this. So, it just worked out perfectly. It's a really fun movie, really great conversation that I have with him. Also, the opening part of the conversation, probably the first hour or so, we talk about sort of Marvel's big year coming here in 2025 because, Brave New World is going to be coming out soon, but, so they have a big slate compared to last year. So the interesting thing about that conversation is we recorded it before Captain America Brave New World comes out, but then it's going to drop after the fact. And so Freddie at least will have seen it. I won't, but we'll kind of know by the time the episode drops, like sort of how Brave New World did, what its opening weekend was, that kind of thing. So, we'll see what happens there. But stay tuned for that next week. And then finishing out the month of February, we've got some great episodes scheduled to record, so we'll see what we get in the can there, and of course always keep you posted, so definitely check socials to see what we've got coming up. Now last week I teased that I'd be doing DTVC Extra again. The whole plan was I was going to watch those Nicolas Cage films while I was taking the train up to see my family in New England. Ended up not going to New England this past weekend, so I stayed here close to home, which ended up working out because I live in Philadelphia, and so for my wife, she didn't have to be alone when the Eagles won the Super Bowl and the kind of the crazies took to the streets there. We live close to Broad Street, so it's definitely on where we live. We're not quite in the center city area where you see the stuff on TV of the people climbing the poles and falling and dying and all that stuff. We're kind of South Street area, or sorry, not South Street, South Philly area. So we don't get it quite as bad, but it was definitely a crazy scene there. And so I think it was a little bit nicer. I get to enjoy them winning with her as well, but at the same time, she didn't have to deal with the kind of the craziness by herself. I got to kind of be there with her for it. So that ended up working out, but it meant no Nicolas Cage movie. So I don't know when the DTVC Extra will be back in that sense. I'm not sure when we'll do that one again, because I don't know when I'm going to get a chance to do those Nicolas Cage movies, just because I've got other movies lined up either for the main podcast or for the blog that I've got to watch. So, again, keep you posted. Hopefully in the near future I'll be able to do that because it does still look like a fun idea. Looks like the movies are still available, so I should still be able to do it. So we'll kind of see what happens there. Now, in terms of the site, we just did Armed Response this past weekend with Wesley Snipes' film, one that I've been meaning to do for a while. Definitely a bit of a dud, but at least we got it reviewed. That's kind of, I guess, when you have a review site, that's one of the things that's great about when you watch a movie that's not really great. You can get something out of it, right? You can make some lemonade out of those lemons. One reason why it's good to have a review site, have a podcast, things like that, is you can get content even out of the movies that aren't great. But anyway, so we did Armed Response. This coming weekend, we're going to do Showdown, a Billy Blank's film, with Christine Taylor, who's, we know her from, if you're younger, if you're like me, right, you're of a certain age, you know her from Hey Dude, but then also the Brady Bunch movies, and then some of the Ben Stiller films, because the two of them ended up getting married. But she has a very early role here in Showdown. Definitely a fun movie there with Billy Blanks. Also, Brian James is in it. He has a small part in it. So, and Patrick Kilpatrick, right? You gotta love Patrick Kilpatrick. So we'll be reviewing that this weekend. That will be review number 1299. So that means the next one after that is going to be Diamond Cartel, the one that's going to get Don the Dragon Wilson into the 30 Club, and that'll be our 1300 post. So that's why it's going to delay a little bit doing the Baby in the Basket review, because I'm just going to kind of shoehorn that one in here, get that one in the can. Because then after Diamond Cartel, the plan is to do a movie called Rhapsody that has it has Fred Williamson in it. I believe it might also have Ice-T in it, but that's going to be kind of the one that will close out the month of February for us. So yeah, definitely keep an eye on the site as we're going to be posting those. The other big news regarding the site was that we posted our DTVC alphabetical archive on Letterboxd. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely check it out. You can give it a like, see how many of the movies we reviewed on the site were that you've seen yourself. Definitely check that out. I mean, again, it's not quite the 1300 because some of the indie movies that we did when they were made before Letterboxd, and then they haven't been added subsequently. So there's like, I think like 6 or 7 of those movies, and then there's movies like, for example, Maximum Potential, which I guess Letterboxd doesn't consider that to be a movie. The other funny thing is that when I look on IMDb, I think I'm the only review site that's reviewed. I'm the only critic review for Maximum Potential. But I mean, it's a Dolph movie. I got to do it, right? So that one's not on there. And then there's a couple that I did twice. If you remember, I did Mean Guns twice and American Ninja 2 I did twice. And then of course there's the Van Damme Film Fest that I did for post number 400. Obviously that's not going to be on Letterboxd. So it doesn't quite equal out to the 1300 that we're going to have for posts here. So just keep that in mind as well. The other thing, I did put a disclaimer at the top letting people know that obviously there was a period of time when I did wildcard posts, if you remember. And so, on Fridays I would either do box office busts, or I did comic book movies, all kinds of different things that I would do for those wildcard posts. I think if you remember, I did 3 reviews a week, I think it was like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so Fridays would be the wildcard posts. I did Hong Kong films, if you remember as well, movies from the 70s like that. So not everything is going to be strictly direct to video. If you've been with us for a long time, of course, you know that. But if you're new to the site, it might be something you're going to be, oh, that's a direct video movie. I didn't know that. Somebody commented on Instagram. I don't know if you caught that. They were like, I didn't know. Bronx Warriors isn't direct to video. Is it a sort of a loose title that you're giving? And it's like, I love that they missed that 12 Rounds was on there as well. I mean, 12 Rounds was definitely much less direct to video than Bronx Warriors was, right? Bronx Warriors doesn't even have box office information, let alone, whereas 12 Rounds has what did it make, like 17 million in the box office? So yeah, so that's there. I mean, the other thing too, if you remember when I first started the site, I think I had a rule of like 5 million. Anything under 5 million, I consider DTV. So we kind of fudged it some just to get certain movies. I mean, Commando, right? I reviewed Commando for I think maybe the 800th post or 900th, something like that, just to do it. So again, if you've been with us for a while, how strict I am about the direct-to-video moniker. Sometimes it's just about us having fun and just celebrating movies. And, if we're having fun and celebrating a movie that doesn't happen to be direct-to-video, but it's one that, as fans of the site, we all enjoy, sometimes that's what we cover there too. So, but yeah, you can go on Letterboxd and you can get that list there. Again, see how many you've reviewed. I always kind of have fun, like with Will from Exploding Helicopter, right? His Exploding Helicopter list on Letterboxd. So I kind of see how many movies I've done on there. So that's always kind of a fun thing as well. So definitely check that out. Last thing, of course, is my newest book, Nadia and Aiden. You can get that on Kindle Unlimited, and in paperback. You may have noticed lately I've been trying to push the books a little bit more on the site, so trying to get some more sales there. So always appreciate anybody who wants to, if you know to buying the book, or maybe you've already bought the book and you're seeing like, oh, hey, I already bought Nadia and Aiden, I don't need to buy it again, right? And if you bought all of my books, which I always appreciate people who have bought all of them so far, liking, sharing, retweeting, that always, I guess not retweeting, I'm not on Twitter anymore. What is it? Reposting, I guess is what it is on Blue Sky. But yeah, sharing them always helps as well. But, definitely if you're interested, looking for something new to read, pick up one of my books. I always appreciate it. If you're looking for something new to put on your bookshelf but not read, that's always a great thing as well. I always appreciate that too. But the links to Nadia and Aiden are in the podcast description, so you can check that out as well. All right, why don't we have John Cross from Every Movie Diner playing our theme song here, and then when we come back, we're going to have Nate and Tom come on to talk about their newest film, The Baby in the Basket. everyone, welcome back to the DTVC podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and I'm joined by two very special guests who we had on a couple of years ago. We've got Nathan Shepka, director and actor, and then Tom Jolliffe, who we had on recently as well to talk about some other movies. But they're both here to talk about their newest film that's going to be coming out right around the time that this episode drops, Baby in the Basket. Welcome back, guys.
All right, how's it going?
Yeah, thanks for having us back.
Yeah, and I think it was like 2023 we had you guys on to talk about the movie that had come out a little bit after that episode, or a little bit before that episode, When Darkness Falls. But then you were just starting production on Baby in the Basket then.
Yeah, that would have been right. Yeah,
I think we're advertising the Indiegogo campaign at that point, and so now we're at the point where it's here, right? The movie's finally being released, and I got a chance to see it, and I definitely really enjoyed it.
cool. That's good. Yeah, I mean, we're looking forward to the release. It's a little bit of a departure for us in terms of pacing and genre. So it'll be interesting to see what the response is.
Yeah, well, because one of the things I think, because the other film that you've had come out, Nathan, just like within the past couple of weeks that I reviewed on the site was When Darkness Falls, and definitely two very different movies. I mean, they both kind of have a dramatic element to them, and but yeah, they're very different in terms of style and feel.
Yeah, I mean, I guess When Darkness Falls was probably again a little bit of a throwback to the sort of 70s thriller type thing. Obviously it was a small cast. I mean, we'd shot that during probably the middle to the latter half of lockdown, so Tom and I were really just looking for something that we could do kind of quickly, and we could create a bit of a social bubble and didn't have to incur huge numbers of cast and crew and whatnot and locations and everything. So that worked out pretty well. I started off with a film called Holiday Monday, and I was actually meant to do Dead Before They Wake after that, but then lockdown hit, so that's why Tom and I ended up doing When Darkness Falls together to kind of I suppose take advantage of that situation, but more so just so we could do something during it.
Yeah, and I mean that one came out really great. I think you talked about that like the pandemic in a way enhanced the film because you had a lot of like open locations that you could film because there weren't a lot of people walking around, and then it was kind of easier to get Airbnbs to film the interior shots.
Yeah, no, that's right. In a weird way, it did kind of help the fact, and I think the fact that there weren't too many people, walking around the locations that we were using, added to the sort of desolate nature of what we were going for. But it's one of those things. We did get a few raised eyebrows from the locals when we started shooting in the village, especially during the pandemic. But I mean, it's one of those things. We tried to do everything that we could to ensure that we weren't, causing any problems or being a hazard. Well, no more so than any normal film crew, but.
Yeah. Now, is that something with your more recent one, When Darkness Falls, where you're sort of filming on locations there? It is more of a hassle, I guess, to sort of section off places or get shooting where people aren't going to be sort of walking through the shots or anything like that.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, when Darkness Falls, I think when I reviewed that one, I think the thing that kind of was different about it. Or sorry, I got When Darkness Falls and Dead Before They Wake. I got mixing up the titles there. Dead Before They Wake is like it's definitely a kind of a darker film compared to When Darkness Falls. But When Darkness Falls felt like more of a straight ahead thriller, like you said, sort of a throwback to sort of older version. Whereas Dead Before They Wake, it didn't pull any punches from when I was watching it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd kind of wanted to do something a bit darker. Generally, that's the sort of film that I like. Anyway, films like Nocturnal Animals, Death Sentence, those sort of gritty action movies that don't necessarily always turn out too well in the end. Stuff like Taxi Driver as well. But actually, for a while I'd wanted to make a film that was based on the grooming gang scandal in the UK. So we had, a few different areas that were the sort of focus of the media when they exposed these kind of sex trafficking rings. And obviously it's not just any sex trafficking, it's child sex trafficking, so that alone it takes on a real dark edge. But I thought that was the perfect way to, I suppose, distract and kind of almost go to the opposite of what I've been doing before. So I've made a couple of light sort of jovial action thrillers that are filled with one-liners and stuff like that. But I didn't really want to be pigeonholed for doing that, and so I thought I'm going to try and do something that's really dark and kind of goes against anything that I've done before. But yeah, it is. It's probably quite a kind of disturbing, distressing film, but that's sort of what we were going for.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely comes across. I think that's one of the things, and I think Tom probably knows this too, with the kind of the modern direct-to-video market. Trafficking always seems to be a topic, or it seems to be a theme in the films, but it's always kind of this more damsel in distress, white knight rescuing this young woman before anything bad happens to her kind of approach to trafficking. And there's always kind of these more elaborate schemes. There's a movie called Ruthless that Art Camacho directed with Dermot Mulroney, where it's like the character was infiltrating the trafficking scheme. He went to a fancy hotel where he had to create a login password and bid on women with this fancy approach. And this is sort of not anything like that at all. It's not like a fun concept in an action movie. It's definitely a gritty drama approach.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the ways that the traffickers operate and then before they wake, that was kind of rooted in reality as well. So there was a BBC series a few years ago that was actually based on the same thing. It's more of a, I don't want to say a docudrama, but it's a straight up dramatization of the events. More based in truth than Dead Before They Wake is, but certainly, we were inspired by that and took some of the ways that the sex trafficking gangs operate, and put those into our film, because I did want to root that in reality about how and who these guys were likely to prey on. As you say, it's always more sophisticated in sort of Hollywood direct-to-video movies. I mean, even stuff like Six Bullets with Van Damme, it's kind of the same setup.
Yeah. And I think when it is that kind of thing where it doesn't pull punches, it definitely like it's more real, obviously, and but yeah, it can be harder to watch in spots. The one area that I thought you did sort of, I don't say Hollywoodize it, but I thought that was kind of more stylistic that I also appreciated was, for the most part, your character in Dead Before They Wake is not like a kind of your Superman, sort of, but man on fire kind of thing, right? Like he can't just beat up five guys in a room at once or that kind of thing. But there was that really nice knife fight that you had at one point in the film that I thought was really, really well done.
Yeah, I mean, we felt that there kind of needed to be something in the middle of the film that's kept the attention action wise, because it's like everything else, straight up dramas in direct to video land don't sell that well. So we kind of had to bring a bit of an action element to it, and we couldn't have done anything too elaborate in the middle of it, because that would mean that obviously if you rumble the bad guys, then you're kind of already building towards a conclusion. I think part of Day Before the Wake is that it was everyone was kind of sneaking around at night trying not to get caught. But yeah, the knife fight it was basically just meant to be this kind of frantic struggle, really unexpected, for the audience, and that you were just kind of thrown into it. I can't remember what my inspiration was for that, but I think part of it, how it ends, was kind of a little bit inspired by the I think it was the knife scene in Blue Ruin that takes place in the toilets. But I kind of wanted to almost go anti-violence with it, and have him stand back and just kind of look at the severity of his actions, or what I mean. It was almost meant to be more anti-violence than anything. But yeah, it's a cool fight. I think it turned out relatively well.
Yeah, and to your point about the sort of the anti-violence part of it, I think that was a big piece about that character is that it almost felt like he was somebody who would get sort of wrapped up in the moment of situations
Yeah.
and sort of get taken away by that moment, and then maybe have a moment to afterwards to reflect and sort of patch up his wounds or sort of think about what was happening. But when he was wrapped up in the moment, it always felt like he had to see it through, and no matter what it took to see that through at that moment.
Yeah, and we were trying to sort of build to the end where, things had kind of gone that wrong, and he kind of realizes that the only option is just to kind of go out there and try and take them apart. And obviously, it builds to him going a little bit nuts at the end. So it's kind of that old man pushed to the edge kind of thing. I know that a couple of the reviews said that it was kind of reverted into action thriller territory at the end instead of keeping the sort of the realism of it. But to be honest with you, again, going back to the sort of rules of direct to video, if you like, you kind of have to have some payoff for the audience. I mean, the film was partly inspired by You Were Never Really Here as well, but obviously that's kind of bordering more on art house and it's more dramatic, and they actually shied away from not seeing the violence at all. You can't really get away with it that much without big cast, and obviously there's a certain expectation for audiences going into a film like Dead Before They Wake. So I felt that we had to have the payoff at the end, and I think that the film does benefit from it because given the atrocities committed by the bad guys for the duration of the film, I think that the audience really want to see them get their comeuppance, even if it does stray a little bit further outside of the realms of realism.
Yeah, and I think that knife fight scene, and there's a few other moments in the movie where you can see the character teetering a bit to where he is starting to take things a little bit too far, or he's pushing things a little bit, and you can almost kind of see that might be ultimately where he would take things, just because that's sort of his mentality. So it's almost like I think there were enough breadcrumbs earlier along that it did feel, at least for me, it felt organic enough, even if it was maybe outside the scope of what the film had been to that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean that was kind of the intention. So if some people think we pulled that off, then I'm happy enough with that.
Exactly. Yeah. No. And I mean that one, that Dead Before They Wake, that's available now here in the States. I believe it's a VOD. And I think it just came out, or maybe tomorrow. Or well, as we're recording it, I think it's tomorrow. It'll be out in the UK. So by the time people listen to this, they'll also be able to get it in the UK as well.
Yeah, that's right. So it was 7th of January in the US, and then 27th of January in the UK. And I think it should probably be hitting the likes of Tubi and whatnot towards the end of February, start of March in the US as well.
Yeah, so I think everybody should definitely check it out. And of course, my review is on the site as well, so you can check that out. Again, I do have a section on spoilers because I wanted to talk about some pieces in the end, which I won't necessarily get into here because I don't want to give anything away for people that haven't seen it. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth checking out. And again, get it either on VOD or, like you said, eventually it'll be on Tubi as well. Like your other films, I think Lock and Load is also on Tubi, and then the one we were just talking about, When Darkness Falls, which Tom wrote, is also on Tubi.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, when we transition into The Baby in the Basket, and I guess maybe the first question, I think when we had you guys on a couple of years ago, we did talk about sort of like what the inspiration was, but yeah, where was the inspiration for this film?
Tom, I'll leave that one for you, mate.
Yeah, we actually started with Nathan. He had the sort of the genesis of an idea, which was, a baby gets left on the doorstep of a church, and then everything kind of descends into this kind of mix of The Omen and Rosemary's Baby. So it kind of went from there. I kind of liked that concept, so I was quite keen to write it. And then we kind of took a lot more inspiration from a lot of other gothic horrors and kind of melodramas of the sort of late 40s up to the 60s. So yeah, films like Black Narcissus and things like that. So we wanted to do something that was a complete sort of change of pace, really. And horror at the time we felt was also quite a strong market to get into. It seems to be something that at the moment it's one of the few things in like the mainstream where sort of mid-level budget and low budget films are doing quite well. Seems to be a recent kind of horror boom. So, that makes it a good, viable option to go into. And then in terms of the sort of the budget that we're sort of working under, again, it's one of those where people kind of gravitate towards horror. I suppose there's a feeling that it's slightly easier to do on a smaller scale. So yeah, we then kind of, as we were developing it, we started off thinking about possibly doing it as a period piece, and then we kind of very specifically put it into the just at the tail end of the Second World War, just to give it an extra added dimension as well. So yeah, I mean, that's always going to be a challenge on a low budget as well. So we kind of made it a little bit more difficult for ourselves doing it that way. But I think combined with the location that we managed to find and how everything turned out, I think that adds something to it. Just having it kind of set in a specific time and place, that kind of adds an extra element to the whole kind of gothic horror story that we had.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree there because I just sort of my own take on it. I mean, I felt also kind of a Hammer horror vibe, but it felt
Yeah,
like those elements from things like Black Narcissus and some of those inspirations from Rosemary's Baby and things like that. I know that the term elevated is used a lot when it's talking about horror, that thing, but it felt like it some of the elements of Hammer horror that kind of can be a little bit more crass or almost, kind of feel like they're just sort of pumping things out. It felt like those other elements sort of pulled those pieces away from the Hammer. So it was almost like, I don't want to say elevated Hammer horror, but it definitely it didn't have the crassness that Hammer has, but it did have sort of the horror elements that you always appreciate from those movies.
yeah, definitely. I mean, that was, Hammer was another thing that we kind of had in mind. Um, just in terms of like the aesthetics as well, we wanted to have quite. I mean, we pondered at one stage about potentially doing it black and white, but then as soon as we kind of firmly set our footing into doing it in color, we felt that we wanted to almost have a slightly, I guess, technicolor quality to it. Vibrant colors and strong contrast. So yeah, there was that. And from for me personally as a writer as well, I did want to do something a little bit elevated, um, to have a script that had kind of layers in it, because I think we could have taken the rough idea of it, gone to a low budget horror studio and said, you look, we'll make this for you if you front the money or you help us find the money. But we would have had to have done something far more kind of routine, I think, and straight down the middle. Just like a standard jump scare, non-horror. So that was something we definitely wanted to move away from and do something that where we can lay little Easter eggs through the films and have a little bit of subtext in it. Um, and yeah, hopefully some of that came through.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the jump scare thing is a great point because I recently saw Nosferatu in the theater, and there was a trailer for the new Wolfman movie, and you could see the jump scare in that trailer coming, like well, off in the distance, and it was one of
Yeah,
those things where I started laughing when I saw the jump scare, and I think that's one of the thing with horror audiences. I think to some extent, if you ask them what they'd want, they would talk about jump scares like, oh yeah, it's kind of a traditional thing. I appreciate that, but then in reality, I think that nobody wants it to be predictable. They don't want, when they can see that kind of thing coming. And yeah, and I think also too, when you're doing something that is probably going to be direct to video or maybe have limited theatrical release, jump scares don't always come through as well, I don't think, when I'm watching it on my TV or tablet or something like that. And so I think that also helps to, almost sort of fit it within the realm of where people are watching it.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, definitely.
yeah, to me, I mean, yeah, the jump scares. There is nothing like the sort of the cinema experience, especially in terms of building tension. And I've watched films on streaming that I've seen in the cinema, and the second time I've watched them at home, I'm like, that's not quite as tense as I remember. I mean, obviously you've already seen it, but I think the atmosphere in cinemas is great. But like you say, the jump scare thing is a little bit overplayed as well. I think it's almost expected now. So I think that trying to build up an atmosphere is almost a more difficult thing to do, or trying to give it that really kind of that sustained feeling of dread throughout the film. I personally like that better in horror films and enjoy that more than the jump scare thing.
Yeah, and it felt too, kind of going back to When Darkness Falls, that it almost feels like the set that you use here. I know, like you were saying, Tom, that it kind of made things a little bit more difficult for you, and some, making it a period piece in those elements. But that the setting already adds an ominous quality to the film, that I think, one, it helps us as the viewer to sort of already be in that mindset of, okay, there's going to be some interesting things happening here. But it almost feels too, almost like maybe like the cast as well, like they're sort of in that setting. They can already start to play those parts that way and sort of add that atmosphere as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think the cast all pretty much said that as well. The one main location we had, which was St Conan's Kirk in Scotland, um, that just looks, amazing. It's this big kind of gothic place, and it was perfect for the film. Via the magic of editing and things like that, we kind of used a couple of other locations as well, spliced them together. So I think it really does add something to the film. So yeah, I'm hoping that people will appreciate the atmosphere that we're trying to build with the film.
It definitely came through for me. And again, going back to that Hammer horror element, where it's like, whatever, fifth or sixth version of Dracula that they make, where the Oliver Reed or whoever is coming into some town in Eastern Europe, and then there's Christopher Lee who shows up. But that castle itself always seemed to add something to the films, and I think that's something that comes through here for sure.
Yeah, no, we were pretty lucky to get that location, because it was actually one of my friends had shown me it online, and I thought, wow, I didn't even know that existed, and I drove out to see it, but I didn't think for a minute that we were going to be able to get it for the film, and I think that that's a huge part of probably what elevates the production values of the film, and just I haven't shot it there. I can't imagine. Having shot it anywhere else, that it would have turned out as well. I mean, we could have gone for something really modest and quite small, like probably would have been the reality of the situation. But I think that when you're going for that sort of gothic look, you want the pillars and the height and the sort of the vastness of it.
Yeah, because think about like Black Narcissus, where or Black Narcissus, where it kind of like a similar type of thing, where it's like kind of a bigger location, and of course in their case they were able to shoot it on a lot. I think a lot of those parts were on a lot for that film, but it's a piece of the movie, right, where they're kind of just moving through these different spaces, and it adds the atmosphere to it. Of course, Black Narcissus has a kind of a different feel to this, because this is definitely more of a horror film than that one does, but it still adds that element, that, like you said, the vastness, where um, the characters can kind of exist in, I don't know, like they kind of exist separately, but they're still connected. I don't know if that makes sense. Like I kind of get the sense that each character had their own thing going on, but they were still kind of, they could exist by themselves, but yet still sort of intertwined. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, so I don't know if I explained that well enough. I was like for example, your character in the film, Nathan, where you could kind of be off by yourself doing things, but yet you're sort of always up against the nuns and seeing, interacting with them at different points.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's one of those things where, the place is that big that you could probably, you know, you're constantly kind of looking around corners or whatever, or you're bumping into someone in the corridor. But yeah, it's that sort of feeling of loneliness, despite the fact that you are all together in this building. But I suppose the location kind of lends itself to that as well. I mean, even when we were filming in there late at night, and putting away equipment or whatever, they had a basement which is the cellar in the film, and going down there when we were wrapping at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're kind of clearing out and locking doors, and getting back in the van to drive back to the accommodation, you're sort of thinking, yeah, I wouldn't like to be locked in here overnight, kind of thing. But yeah, I know what you're saying. You kind of got that. I imagine that that's kind of what it was like, and a lot of other films that are set in these convents kind of feel like that as well. There's a bit of a disconnect, in that everyone's kind of almost living in their own little separate world within this vast location.
Yeah, and one of the things I think it almost kind of mitigated is, thinking about, again, Black Narcissus, where you have the main character, Mother Superior, Sister Chadwick, I think I'm saying her name right, where we get these snippets of her past, and we don't really get that much in this. I think with your character, Nathan, we get a little bit of what he went through in the war, but for the most part, we don't really get those snippets. It's kind of more, we sort of experience them through the film. But I think in a way, it allows you to mitigate that, not having to shoot, go off and shoot somewhere else and shoot a scene where Miriam Diabo is, or a young Miriam Diabo is doing so, or whatever it would have been. We can kind of get the sense of who they are just by how they're interacting with the space and the different scenes by themselves, or with the other actors.
Yeah, and Tom actually had a really clever way of trying to portray, what each character was like by using the seven deadly sins. But I'll let Tom explain that one.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the elements that we wanted to put into it, just to try and add layers to each character. So the idea that each of the characters kind of has their own connection to one or more of the seven deadly sins. So it could be one character that's kind of guilty of pride, and one that's guilty of envy. In Nathan's case, he's guilty of lust. As for his character, but yeah, so we wanted to add those elements into the film, really, just to give. It's just something that some people watching might pick up on, just to give it an extra kind of layer, really.
Yeah, no, I felt that came through. That and I think in particular, like Miriam Dabo's character, it almost felt like her character was, going again back to Black Narcissus, but almost like if Mother Superior, like if Black Narcissus took place in the location where the baby in the basket was set, it's almost like her, like 30 or 35 years later. And so sort of she's lived this life as a nun, despite having the past, and so I think it really plays into her character well. It was a take on her character I wasn't expecting, but then it was natural when things start to unfold with the baby being dropped off and all of that.
Yeah, and I think with Mayim's character, she's kind of, to me, she had kind of lived out her life as a nun, but she had this sort of resentment or envy, in a way, of people that had done other things in life that she hasn't. So we had it that she was sort of a little bit disappointed is not the right word, but that she hadn't had the opportunity to have a child, or she's always very kind of dismissive of Daniel, my character, because he's obviously playing into his lust and his sexual fantasies, whereas she's probably never had the chance to do that, being repressed. So that, we're trying to bring through kind of shades of that as well, that she had been around for quite a long time, but was maybe starting to miss out on some of the things that other people have had in life, that because of the path that she chose, she didn't.
Yeah, and I think that really comes through too in her interactions with Michaela Longden's character, where she's sort of the one who, we think of maybe the nun who's gone astray, right? Who's sort of like questioning her faith, and she sort of leaves the film for a bit to go to the mainland, then comes back, and you get the sense that Miriam Diabo's character almost, I don't want to say puts up with her, but forgives her for the things that she does, maybe in a way that she wouldn't be so forgiving with other people, because it's almost like she sees herself in that character.
Yeah, there was a little bit of that. They're sort of they butt heads a lot, but I think there's a sense really that um, the Mother Superior does see a little bit of maybe herself, 30 years ago. So yeah, it was just all about having these different dynamics between certain characters, and everyone having their own sort of past that kind of leads them into what happens in the film. And we wanted to keep certain things a little bit kind of ambiguous as well. So, there's a little bit of ambiguity as to why Michaela's character goes to the mainland, for example. Yeah, so it was just a case of really, in terms of like writing the script, was having these elements that were sort of ambiguous and intriguing, but at the same time, we still had to kind of progress things forward and have a main plot line that builds up to a nice finale.
Yes, which I think definitely comes through there. I think there's enough breadcrumbs to maybe tell us where we're going at certain points. But yeah, the finale definitely came through for me. I definitely liked. I obviously won't talk about the finale here, but because I think people will really appreciate it. I mean, one of the interplays in the film that I also liked was your character Nathan with Paul Barber, who I know Tom you worked with on Renegades. And so what was that like getting him into the film and playing that part?
Yeah, no, it was cool. He was a really nice guy, really down to earth. Yeah, he's dead happy guy, always very, very chatty, and yeah, just really easy to work with. He comes in and he's kind of like your mate. So yeah, no, he was good, and I thought that he brought a real gravitas to the to Amos. And you can tell, when someone's put a lot of effort and thought into the part, because he had said to me that the little bit of gold, the gold nugget that he's got in his hand, that's a kind of souvenir in a way. Even though it's a slightly grim souvenir, he'd said, I thought this was maybe a reminder of the war that he had fought in, and maybe he took it off someone that he killed, and he's like, that's a reminder of his actions, kind of thing. So, he'd obviously thought about the character in depth as well. So it's always nice when someone comes in and they're prepared, but they've kind of given it that extra thought and backstory kind of thing.
Yeah, which it's definitely it came through there. I think thinking about like the Hammer horror piece, like your character might have been like the Oliver Reed character, but probably would have been by himself most of the film. And I think that was an interesting piece that your character was by himself at some points, but other points he had Paul Barber there. And I think that like you said, that piece about the gold and sort of remembering the war, I think it almost humanized your character as well in that interplay.
Yeah, because I guess you're having something for those characters to identify with each other. And I suppose you can say something like war is in a weird way the perfect thing to bring people together in terms of life experience. Generationally, they always say that nothing really changes, that the people who are 70, 80, 90 are basically just the same as younger people. They go through the exact same things in life. Whether technology and everything round about them changes the essence of problems in life, and what it is to be human kind of remains the same. So yeah, it's quite an interesting dynamic there, and I think that worked well. I think that worked well within the setting of the film as well.
Yeah, and it's almost like Paul Barber's character knows what your character is going through, and he's almost trying to like warn him away from sort of giving into those temptations, but he almost knows too like it might be inevitable in a sense the way he's talking to him.
Yeah, it's almost like he's kind of had those same thoughts himself at some point.
Yeah, and what I like too is that the juxtaposition when you've got Mariam Dabo's Mother Superior character, it's almost like she knows the same things about the nuns, but because of the the sort of the way that those social interactions have to happen, kind of based on the constraints of being in the nunnery, where your character and Paul Barber's character can have these frank conversations in the house where the the maintenance person or the keeper of the location are able to stay. They can have those sort of conversations outside of that. There's always this constraint of the nunnery or the sort of the social conventions of that are constantly causing them from being as frank as they want to be, or they can be frank at some points, but especially Mariam Diabo's character, she can't be as frank as Paul Barber can be in those interactions.
No, and I think I think the comment itself makes quite an interesting setting in that sense, because we did try and bring about a bit of that the melodrama that was in the likes of Black Narcissus to the film. But yeah, it's I guess it would. The thing is as well, but the period setting is. I don't think that it would quite work as well these days. I know something like Immaculate, for example, I think was set in the present or the relative present, but they had dispensed with all of the mobile phones and the trappings of modern life. So I think that it would kind of have ruined the atmosphere if we'd modernized it.
Yeah, 'cause I don't think you could do the things if you'd modernized it. I don't think you could do the things that you did with the nuns in particular. Some of the things with those characters. I think, like for example, it would have been too easy if it was modernized for one of the nuns to have an affair with your character. I think we almost would have been asking why some of those things weren't happening. Whereas I think there were enough social restrictions, not just from the convent standpoint, but even just from the realities of 1940s England, that I think allowed you to sort of, I guess, not sort of lay out your cards on the table. I guess maybe in a sense that you couldn't just you could have enough restraint in certain aspects in it, and it felt organic as opposed to just doing it for the sake of the plot.
No, definitely.
And then you mentioned that the challenges in that and sort of setting it as a period piece. And what were some of the things that you ran into that sort of made it a little bit harder on yourself by not setting it in the present?
I mean, I think that probably started off with the script, Tom.
Yeah, it was a sense of what we could put in there that felt realistic to the time. Um, so yeah, we were trying to sort of limit anything that felt too modern, really, in terms of like language as well, the way people spoke, um, and just some of the realities of being kind of shut away from the storm. I mean, part of it as well is that um, we're setting it in the kind of very early days of electricity. So, there's an old generator, but for most of the film, it's kind of busted. So, that kind of led to the stylistic choice to have a lot of it lit by candles, um, which looks really great on film, but obviously it provides certain production challenges. Uh, yeah, so we tried to do as much as we could with the script and make it feel uh, that it was realistic as something set in 1944, with all the technology that we have in the film, just like old school radios and things like that. So yeah, um, I mean we pushed it a little bit with the generators as well, because I think there's a sense that sometimes a convent that remote um, would have had no electricity at all at that time, but we kind of we pushed logic a tad by having the fact that they would normally have a generator there, um, because obviously electricity was around, but wouldn't necessarily have been in a remote convent like that.
Yeah, that makes sense because I think as a it's funny because I think for most viewers like myself, right, I wouldn't necessarily put that part together. Like, oh yeah, it's the island probably wouldn't have it, but it's like I guess I don't know if you think about that like going in like, oh boy, I wonder if this is going to be listed in the IMDb goofs, right, or like if somebody's going to comment and say, oh, they wouldn't have had electricity there.
Yeah, there's always some person that does it, but I think in films like this you have to take a little bit of artistic license. And yeah, we'll see. I mean, I'm sure that someone will comment on the wrong wimples on the nuns, or whatever it might be. But we'll have to we'll see what we can get away with.
Even on set, some of the time I was, Googling, did they have this in the 1940s? I mean, I think locations wise, ironically, with the locations, I think we actually really struck gold, because the 1940s is long enough ago that you can still, go online and find a bunch of stuff on eBay or these retro sites. But for locations, it was long enough ago that you'll find that museums and whatnot have set up kitchens from that era or bedrooms or whatever to show what life is like back then. If you go any later than that, you'd think that that would be more in abundance, but it's actually not the case. So going back a bit further was probably helpful in this instance, because it was long enough ago that people are interested in the history of that time. But yeah, there were times where we're thinking in certain locations, because of health and safety and whatnot, we're going, do we cover that up? Would they have had that sort of thing? Even stuff like taps or fixtures and fittings and stuff, you begin to kind of rely on Google to answer those questions.
Yeah, that's always the thing. I know my wife and I watched the show Mad Men, which took place in the 60s. And in one of the first seasons, he opens up a beer by just using like a little can opener thing to pop holes on either side. And we're like, is that real? Was that, when did they first have pop tops for, where you kind of just pull the tab? And then we looked and it was like 63 was when that, and it's like, oh, wow, they actually, yeah. So, and I don't know if they were Googling it as well, but that's kind of that thing where you kind of Google and go, oh, did they have that? I think for myself growing up in the 80s, sometimes I'll Google to be like, do I remember that correctly from the 80s? So yeah, I can imagine you doing the same thing with the 40s. I guess even the dialogue piece, right? Because I think about like, obviously, my grandparents lived through the 40s. They were born in the 20s. And I think about like talking to them and some of the language and stuff that they would use. And it's like, okay, I can kind of get a sense of like what it might be, because I would imagine like literature for that time period is probably cleaning it up and making it maybe not quite what, like you almost probably can't refer to that or popular TV or things like that for how people spoke back then.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately for me, a lot of that was on Tom and the script. I mean, did you find yourself going online, Tom, and researching stuff when you were writing the script?
Oh, I never do any research. So I researched a little bit. I mean, in terms of like the setting as well, we kind of we decided to have it set on kind of like an undisclosed Scottish island, so something maybe like the Shetlands or something like that. I kind of had the idea that they were maybe close enough to the kind of Nordics and Norway that they might at some juncture see an overhead plane passing. So obviously there's reference to that at the beginning with the dialogue for Daniel. So, he kind of makes reference to possibly hearing a German plane sort of flying just in, within eye shot basically. And it's a case of that, it could be that he saw it, or it could be that it's something that's kind of like he's imagined. Um, so yeah, I was careful to sort of place it in a place where it could be conceivable that they might have overheard a plane flying past, for example, and just things like that. Um, yeah, and then we just looked into, costumes and things. I was quite mindful of, I suppose, looking back at a few films of the time, in terms of their dialogue and style and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, I did a fair bit of research on it. But you can never catch everything, and someone is bound to notice something. But if we've managed to make the film engrossing enough and involving enough, hopefully they won't notice anything that might crop up.
Yeah, because I think for me, the setting kind of plays a couple pieces that really worked. I mean, obviously, what we've been talking about, sort of this almost like a liminal space where it's, separate from the rest of England. In a way, I think too, we're separate from the rest of the UK. It's almost in a way too, like because it's so remote, you could almost exist on that convent and you're far enough away from London where like the bombing and everything would have been happening, or even just from the war effort that would be going on there. It's almost like, unless it's sort of the austerity measures that everybody in the UK would have been going through the war, you could almost just only know about the war from the radio. And I think maybe for like
Yeah.
Nathan's character, you can kind of he's almost like getting away from the war, and almost Paul Barber's character saying, well, you can never really fully get away from it. You existed in it. But I kind of like that piece as well, that this war could be going on, but for the people in this convent, the most important thing is his baby, and also the tensions that are going on between them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that adds almost a slight oddness to it. The fact that they are so cut off. I mean, my World War II history is not particularly great. Certainly not when it comes to what Britain went through actually here. But I know that I think some of the islands were kind of used tactically, by the military or whatever. But I think probably the area that we've set the film in, they would have been pretty cut off. I don't know to what extent that they actually would have seen anything, and might have relied on the media or the radio or whatever, as you say, to get the information. But yeah, it's quite an interesting sort of it's almost like a contradiction that this is all going on, and these guys are so remote and are focused on other things. I think that Tom's suggestion was that Daniel's maybe run away from the war or something's happened and he's basically hiding out there to a certain degree. Am I right in saying that, Tom?
Yeah, that was the thinking behind the character as well. I mean, uh, I think, like the Highlands, for example, was probably a place where a lot of people were displaced during the war. So, a lot of these remote regions would have been places where people would have been moved to, having been moved out of, London and the big cities. So, yeah, so you're never quite fully disconnected from the war. But my feeling with Daniel was that he either fled or he was kind of discharged from the war, and he's kind of, he's now kind of trying to keep himself as far away from it as possible, but you can never, fully leave it behind.
Yeah, and I think even that element had played into the character development that we saw in the film, because I was trying to remember which of the characters it was that some of them felt like it would be not, uh, I guess I don't say not courteous, or they would be beneath them to say something directly to Daniel about that. To cast aspersions on his service, but would rather do it behind closed doors, right? That wouldn't be necessary. But I think, like, for example, I think it was Amber Doig Thorne's Agnes character who says something to him directly about him, or maybe it was Michaela Longden's character who says something to him directly, almost making it sound like he was a deserter
Yeah.
or something, and it almost kind of added to us knowing their characters better by how they reacted to Daniel's character, or to Nathan's character, Daniel.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because, at the time it would have been seen as something, there would have been no consideration over sort of mental health or anything like that back then. So, the idea of like someone young, fit, and able that's not out there fighting would have just been, it would have been something that would have, been a sore point with some people, and it would have been this kind of thing that, everyone would have been sort of thinking about, but probably left unsaid. But obviously, Michaela's character, who's quite outspoken, is the first one to kind of say it. And then, yeah, Amber's character later on kind of makes mention of that as well. But yeah, that's when we start to see a little bit of manipulation there as well. So it's almost like she's trying to appease his guilt slightly in certain stages.
Yeah, and kind of maybe it's a good place to transition into Amber Doig Thorne's character, because I thought she was a really interesting one, because she was one that I couldn't necessarily place in like maybe like a Black Narcissus, or something like that. She wasn't, she didn't seem like she came from something else like that. What was the inspiration for her character and sort of how she goes through the film?
Well, I think it was, we wanted to have this kind of character who's seemingly very kind of doe-eyed and innocent, and kind of very much, you know, she's very young, kind of newish to the church, but she's always been a kind of, Bible reading kind of good Christian girl, Catholic girl. Um, and so we wanted someone quite innocent looking, and we wanted to see this kind of this this moment where she's very kind of idealistic, and really wants to follow the word of God and the word of the Mother Superior and some of her kind of senior sisters. But it's when that kind of doubt creeps in that she starts to really, crave like a word from God. Uh, she needs to hear something from God himself to get some, some clarification, I suppose, and some guidance. But yeah, it's just seeing her character kind of having her faith slowly chipped away before she sort of gets she's almost tempted by faith altogether.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting element to anything that's religious, right? Is to have that one character who is just, almost like sort of taking the literal word. And for Mariam Dabo's character, who's sort of more like, you know, religion is more about her sacrifice and her what she's, she's sort of giving up of herself, whereas Amber Doig Thorne's character is more like almost cultish in a way, like someone who could be in a cult, right? Who she's just sort of, like
Yeah.
you said, she wants to hear from God. It was an interesting addition for sure.
Yeah, I think the idea was that she was kind of impressionable and, a little bit naive compared to the others. So in my mind, the demon, or however you want to put it, the what's going on, saw her as probably the most realistic vessel in terms of being able to because she's impressionable. And I suppose the irony is that Michaela's character, despite her sort of outspokenness and her lack of belief and her addiction to alcohol, she was probably the least likely to be influenced by something like that. So I thought that was quite an interesting contrast.
And then kind of as you were talking about this character, I mean, Lisa Reisner's Lucy character, kind of similar to Amber Doig Thorne's, where she's more naive, but then she's also kind of like the more recent, I guess, member of the convent. So she's got her past that's sort of showing up here and there throughout the film.
Yeah, I mean, she was quite an interesting character. We wanted this sense of like someone who was an outsider, um, because Michaela's character also had a past before the church. Um, we wanted this sense that not everyone has kind of been had a Bible stuck to their hand since birth. That some have come, either ventured away from the church and come back to it. And then in terms of Lucy, Lisa's character, she was always meant to be this kind of outsider character. We'd actually cast someone beforehand who was going to play her as like an American character. But because of the strikes out in LA, she had to push back on another shoot and it kind of clashed with our shoot. So we then had to recast, and then Lisa applied out of sort of 600 or so people, and she was German. So it kind of twigged this idea in my mind that actually it would be quite good to have the character as a German character and kind of displaced by the war, kind of someone who's come over to the UK fleeing her own country, but down in London getting kind of abused for her nationality, even though she's got no direct connection with the Nazis or anything like that. So yeah, she's kind of found herself displaced up in this church, and she's got her own kind of past. And so yeah, at the beginning of the film, she's kind of taken a vow of silence. She's got these kind of doubts in her mind, but she's still a person of faith. But she's got a lot of guilt as well. So yeah, that's kind of risen to this point where she's taken this vow.
So in a way, she is kind of like the Kanchi character in Black Narcissus, where
Yeah.
she's silent, and in her case it was a language barrier, but also she's sort of seen as an outsider, and yeah, I guess in that sense, thinking about Black Narcissus in that sense, because I was sort of thinking of Nathan's character Daniel as being like kind of a younger version of Mr. Dean, but in that sense, it's almost like Nathan's character is more like the sort of the prince in that interaction, even though they don't really quite, it's not quite to the same degree that it happens in Black Narcissus, but sort of that sort of back and forth. But I didn't really thought of that, but that actually makes kind of more sense. But having her as a nun kind of adds an extra element to it there, where she's not just some girl that was taken in and is doing chores, but she's also part of the convent, so she's forced by the restrictions of the convent as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think what I had in mind with the character initially was that she was someone that used to be kind of in the church, kind of went away from it and then came back. But then obviously she's had this past in between, and it's kind of, she's racked with guilt from that, that period in her life. And that comes into play with, the strange things that start to happen. I mean, one thing we also wanted to do is to kind of lay these nuggets of a feeling of unease that happens even before the baby arrives. So you've got Annabelle Lanyon's character, who almost kind of has this experience and foresees something. And she kind of she gets this sense of something evil is about to, come, and something bad's going to happen in St. Augustine's. Obviously, she turns out to be right. So, yeah. But yeah, with Lisa's character, it was just something we wanted to have this added dimension. We thought it'd be quite interesting to have someone who's, for most of the film is non-verbal. So again, so she's got to tell a lot of this story just visually, which is good, for an actress as well. But I think, yeah, we really lucked out with Lisa on this one, because it just turned out to be an extra added dimension to the character that was just more interesting from all these different aspects, the nationality and also what she brought to the role.
Yeah, and I think too, like sort of how the other characters interacted with her, allowed us to develop, Nathan's Daniel character more. I think, Amber, Agnes, Amber Doig Thorne's character, and even like Mario, we can kind of see more of them. It's kind of an interesting thing, I guess, when you have a character who's mute like that. The way the other characters bounce off of them develops them at the same time.
Yeah, and it's again, that's quite an interesting dynamic, because I think that anyone that's has to play a character like that, that's mute and has to communicate basically facially or physically rather than through words, it's a greater challenge for them to be able to do that. And like you say, if you've got people round about them almost adding to their narrative through their character, I think that helps it work as well. I mean, the one of the ones that I remembered was Max von Sydow, and I can't remember what the film was called. It's like Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close or something like that. And he had played a mute character for the duration of it. But I think it's added another nice dynamic to it. But yeah, obviously, much more challenging as an actor to convey emotions just through facial expression.
Yeah, and do you find as a director that you've got to sort of find a way to get that out of? Is it sometimes challenging, or in her case with Lisa, where she was she able to kind of nail it, where you have to get them to not overdo it, right? If they're only expressing themselves through their expressions or their facial expressions.
I mean, in all honesty, Baby in the Basket was one of those where, I was just, standing behind the monitor, nodding my head, thinking, these guys are really good. Watching what they're doing. You're watching what they're doing on screen. You're thinking, I can't fault that. Everyone, I think, brought their A game to it, and you're just kind of standing behind the monitor, marveling at what a great job they're doing. So, in all honesty, for me, that part of the job was really really easy. Probably the more difficult aspect was the visual, the visuals, which obviously Andy Crane, the DOP, he also co-directed with me. So, getting the visuals right, especially for a period piece where we were trying to emulate films from a specific time period, that was more challenging. But we're really lucky in that everyone really brought their A game to the table. To be honest with you, to give very little direction. It was really only if maybe a scene needed some changes physically in terms of blocking or whatever, but the actual core of the performances were all really good.
And do you think, there's another director and actor that we've had on the show is another Nathan as well, Nathan Hill from Australia. He, when he was on, he was likening himself to being an actor's director or an actor first and a director second. Do you think for you also acting at the same time that like you can appreciate something more and not feel like you've got to get in there and tell the actors what to do, that like you can recognize what you're seeing better maybe as a fellow actor?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I think that you see someone bring to life what's on the page, and then all of a sudden you kind of go, oh, that's really good. They've done a good job there. I mean, I think that everyone's got their own kind of stylistic choices when it comes to acting, and a lot of the people that I've worked with have brought another dimension to roles, or taken them in a different direction, or even as in depth as different delivery on each line as you kind of envision reading the script. But when they do it, you think, oh, they've really kind of brought that character to life compared to when I was reading it in my head off the page, kind of thing. So yeah, and we've been fortunate that a lot of the actors really just don't require any direction. So it's good for me because it gives me a little bit of extra time to focus on my own acting. But I think as well, when you're in a scene and you're surrounded by people that are really good, it makes it easier for you as an actor as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it feels like it comes through. I mean, it feels like I know, Michaela, of course, you worked with on When Darkness Falls. Also, is it Ella O'Hara or Elle O'Hara?
Yeah,
Who was
yeah.
Yeah, she was really great as well. And I think that, this movie she had a little bit more to work. Her character was in it a little bit more than in When Darkness Falls. But another, I thought she also had a great performance. But again, she's kind of in an interesting lane because she's not any of the sort of extremes that maybe like Agnes or Michaela Longden's, Amber Derrick-Thorne's Agnes or Michaela Longden's character. She's kind of not having to do those sort of extremes in that sense. And sometimes maybe it's a little bit harder to not go in those directions.
Yeah, I'll leave that one for Tom.
Yeah, that was basically the idea of her character, is that she's very kind of regimented. She sticks to the rules. She's a very stable presence initially. So it's that idea of this person that kind of is slowly kind of manipulated, and she's one of the ones that in theory should be the most stable, maybe the least susceptible, but she still kind of surrenders to the darkness, I suppose you could say. Yeah, but again, with getting Michaela in and Elle in, we worked with them before. We always had them in mind from day one, basically, to get them in, because we knew exactly what they would bring to the table. I'd known of Amber. Amber had actually auditioned to be in When Darkness Falls, so she'd always been in mind, and I'd seen some of her work via people that I've worked with. But I felt like this was going to be a good opportunity for her to do something different that she'd not really done before, and really kind of show a range that maybe people didn't expect from her, which I think she really does. So yeah, I mean, like Nathan says, we really lucked out with the cast on this one.
Yeah, and I think it really comes through. And I think again, talking about like sort of the Hammer elements, or kind of that feel of it being a Hammer film. And I think the joke that Christopher Lee always talked about when he do the Hammer movies is that they're like, oh, if you do a bad movie, you perform the hell out of it. You do a good job with it. And I think, obviously I'm not saying this was a bad movie, but I'm saying like if you're talking about the Hammer part of it, right, that one of the things that can elevate Hammer is the performance. But I think it's one of the things that makes this so great here is that, yes, I know you talk about like some of the challenges in terms of shooting a period piece, but I don't know that any of the performances felt out of place, right? They didn't feel like they were, they felt where they belonged, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I just think even in terms of like, having to recast in certain moments, in the long run, it ended up being a blessing, because everyone just fit into the role so well. I'd also say that, we'd always had in mind to get a couple of names in the film. And Paul Barber and Mariam were always basically our first choices for those respective roles. So, for one thing, we kind of really lucked out that, they both wanted to do it. And again, what they brought to the film was, I expected a lot, but they gave more than what I expected.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Paul Barber's performance and especially the way his character not only it was great on its own, but it enhanced Nathan's character. But I think, yeah, Mariam Dabo's character as well. I mean, obviously we know her as being, in James Bond film, I guess, the expression Bond girl, right? That she's known for doing that. In a way, this character is almost like if you did a James Bond movie and then went into the into the convent after, because it's almost like that sense of like she's kind of covered in the habit and all of that stuff. And then when we see her interacting with the baby and she starts taking off those pieces, you can see that that woman who was in Living Daylights, that her it's like there, and it kind of enhances the character a bit in that sense of like what she sacrificed, I guess, to be in the nunnery, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, Marion's performance was great. It's almost a little bit like the location. Now that we've done it, I can't imagine anyone else, in that role.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm the
oh, go
same.
ahead,
Yeah.
sorry. Oh, sorry, I think it was a delay there. Go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
Yeah, it was the same for me. It's just one of those things where everyone was so kind of on point that we couldn't imagine anyone else doing it. And Annabelle Lanyon as well, who we managed to get in. I mean, I we had that was another role we actually had to recast, so I put a casting call out for that. And then in amongst everyone, we'd got an application from Annabelle Lanyon, and I recognised the name, and I recognised her from Legend, the Tom Cruise film. So yeah, that just seemed to be a little piece of fortune. Uh, so we cast her. I mean, originally the character was meant to be younger, so around about the same sort of age group as Michaela and Elle and Amber, really. So we kind of changed it up a bit, and we felt like actually that also added something in having another kind of senior character to go along with Mariam Diabo.
Yeah, that makes sense too, because I think kind of thinking like your case, Tom, with some of the more like sort of writing for hire films, where you'll kind of write a script for something, kind of come over here to the U.S. and maybe turn into an Amityville film or something like that. There's always a sense of like how many young women can we put in this film, and that kind of thing. And I think, like you
Yeah,
said, by sort of mixing up the ages there, it takes that piece of it out. That it's not just about pretty young women, wait for them to take off their nun habits or whatever, that kind of thing. But it's more like it makes it more dramatic and takes that sort of schlock element out of it, I guess.
yeah, definitely. I mean, and then again, that just turned out to be another piece of fortune when we had to sort of find ourselves recasting and kind of rewriting a role. Um, but Annabelle was so good, we almost felt like we wanted a bit more from her, and she also wanted to be in the film a bit more as well. But you know, yeah. So I mean, yeah, she was really great to work with as well.
Yeah, and do you find when it comes to character actors in films like these that like because you're not sort of just sort of pumping it out and just sort of making it just sort of like, okay, let's you know slap Amityville or Van Helsing or whatever, Jurassic or something on it, right, and sell it to an American audience. That we're trying to do something more. I guess I don't like the word elevated because it gets used a lot, but something higher quality that the performances may come out a little bit better because they kind of feel like, okay, somebody's wanting me to do something more here. So here's my chance to shine, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't, if a lot of the right for hire stuff that I do, it doesn't tend to need or require kind of well-rounded characters. You might have someone, maybe like one character in the lead that has a few kind of dimensions, if that. But, this one, we were very keen to kind of have everyone have a character arc. There's not that many characters in the film, but we kind of wanted everyone to have this kind of transition in the film. So we wanted them to have like a good arc, really, and give, all the actors something to do. And again, there will be some actors in it that people might underestimate, maybe like Amber, but I think she'll really surprise people in this, because it's not like just being, cannon fodder for Winnie the Pooh, for example. So yeah, I think I think everyone's going to be surprised with a lot of the performances in this, and even like for someone like Mariam, because you get those associations with being a Bond girl. She's done a lot. She's done so many films, and had some really good performances. But you almost get pigeonholed as a Bond girl, and it's very difficult to shake that off. So for people that might be seeing her for the first time in sort of 15, 20 years, I think they'll be, really pleasantly surprised by how good she is.
Yeah, I think, I hope so. I think people watching this, the elements that she adds to the film are so fantastic that I definitely really liked her role. And I think to your point too, but, oh, go ahead, Dave. Oh, I thought sorry. I thought you were saying, oh, yeah. To your point about giving everybody something to do, one of the things I think that really made this, in a way, kind of better than Black Narcissus is that, Black Narcissus is really about the, Mother Superior, Sister Chadwick, and her relationship with Mr. Dean, and then also Sister Ruth, who's almost like, I don't like not maybe the temptation side of her, or the side of her that wants to be more human, or I don't know exactly how to say it, but there's almost like kind of the other side to her coin. And then you lose the other nuns. It's like you maybe catch maybe Sister Brioni, or you kind of know of her, but as you kind of go down the cast, it's like, what does that nun do, or what does that sister do? I don't really know her character that much. Whereas here, it's almost like there wasn't exactly a main character. I mean, maybe Amber's character might be the closest, but we also she goes away for a bit while other characters step forward. So I never got anybody confused, I think, which was a really important thing, that I could always keep the characters straight because they were developed on their own, individually, like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me this is kind of proper, definition of an ensemble where you are kind of getting, yeah, Amber's probably the sort of overarching, lead, probably just because the apparition or the evil has chosen her as a vessel. But by and large, yeah, the screen time is spread out, really well, I think.
Yeah, and I think of like different horror conventions. There's really kind of any point in the film that you could think one of the other characters could be the lead. Like there's points where Michaela Longden's character might feel like she could be the lead, and it kind of switches back and forth like that, which I also really appreciate, because it added to the suspense there of not knowing where the story was going to go necessarily.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah, I think that was again, we wanted to sort of have this kind of sense of, I guess, unpredictability in it. I suppose it's similar in that way to Alien, where you're kind of jumping between these characters that are all off in their separate little pockets, and everyone kind of gets this moment in this arc, and they're kind of fleshed out and well rounded. So yeah, I mean, yeah, we put a great deal of effort into making sure that all these characters were quite well fleshed out.
Yeah, and I think that always helps, especially if you're kind of coming into something and you don't know, So I think, I recognize, of course, I know El O'Hara and Michaela Longden from When Darkness Falls, and then you might recognize Miriam Dabo or Paul Barber, but not necessarily, especially a lot of the cast is going to be new for people, or they might recognize Amber Doug Thorne, like you said, from the Winnie the Pooh horror film. But yeah, it kind of helps in that sense to be like, okay, as I'm learning who the actors are in this film, I can sort of anchor into each of their stories and know who's doing what, and then when things do happen, I think this is another important piece that happens with horror films sometimes is that when characters aren't fleshed out well in horror films, when they start to do things, it can feel inorganic at moments. And that was another piece of this I thought was important is that when the baby shows up and things start to unravel, the characters need to behave in ways that are organic for it all to work. And I thought that was an important piece here is that by having the characters developed enough, when they did things later on, I wasn't like, okay, I don't know if they would have done that. Like it all made sense as the film unraveled.
Yeah, I think it depends on kind of how extreme it is as well, because I suppose that's a bit of a running joke with horror films is that, characters making really dumb decisions. But I think that, yeah, like you say, I suppose the fact that no one really knew what was going on in The Baby in the Basket, that sense of mystery, took a bit of the rationale out of any decisions that they made. But yeah, I guess like you say, if you've got the characters are developed to a point, you do have a certain assumption of how they're going to behave. I mean, a few times I've kind of watched films, not even horror films, where you kind of go, would an FBI agent really do that? Or, just the sort of general logic of it kind of goes out the window at points. But I suppose that was one advantage that we had in The Baby in the Basket is that part of it, they don't know what's real and what's not, and they don't know what to believe and what not.
Yeah, that's a great point because I know Ethan Hawke said in an interview one time that like one of the reasons why he thinks actors make better directors is that directors don't always ask that question of why am I doing this or what's my motivation, and or that's kind of the classic joke, right? Is that the actor in a spoof will say what's my motivation, right? And the director gets mad at them. But I think it is especially in a horror film, right? Like why are you going to the basement? What's the reason for going down there? And when you develop the characters and say, okay, well actually we've set up El O'Hara's character as someone who always follows the rules and doesn't break the rules. So now where do we take this following the rules? Well, now Amber Doig Thorne's character is someone who is sort of looking for something to believe in, right? That's almost sort of like you said, like childlike, almost cultish. And so now how does she use her belief to play on El O'Hara's belief to start to manipulate her in different ways? Or how is now that sort of following the rules all the time goes from being a positive to something that can actually make her influenced. Yeah, it works in a very organic way, and I think for El O'Hara as an actor, she could look at that and say, "What's my motivation here? Oh, yes, this is my motivation. This is why I'm doing this," and so it ends up coming through on the screen.
Yeah, I mean that's great to hear. That's exactly what we intended, really. We wanted everything to feel like it made sense within the picture, and yeah, we just wanted to have a lot of subtext and nuance to the film. Um, yeah, so we're just hopeful that a lot of the audiences will pick up on it and appreciate it for having a bit more characterization than some similar films.
Yeah. Now I should point out that it is still a horror film, and it does get bloody
Yeah.
at moments. And so yeah, I know. You were talking about Nathan, like the challenge of being like almost like okay, I can let the actors do their thing and not have to worry as much. I mean, when it comes to shooting that kind of thing, like because I know you had some action moments in When Darkness Falls, but I don't know that it quite had like sort of the kind of horror stuff that we get here. That can maybe be a challenge to shoot, especially in the location that you were in.
Yeah, and I think part of it is also kind of making that believable for the audience as well. Especially when you're working at a certain budget level. I mean, obviously I've done a few kind of action things before, and that's the risk that you take with that as well. Is that you kind of turn around and go, well, we don't have the money to do this, so we're just going to have to make it look as good as we possibly can. But I think the horror elements in Baby in the Basket, I think they work well to a degree because we've kind of built up and because some things are shot in a bit of an ambiguous way. But I mean the sort of the climax we kind of had to do something that was a bit of a payoff for the audience. I mean, if you're going to do the slow burn thing, the atmospheric thing, it's to me it's important to have a little bit of a payoff at the end. Without going too crazy. And I suppose that goes back to what I was saying about Dead Before They Wake as well.
Right, because it is one of those deals, right? Because you have to know who right. You have to be able to sell it to people, right? You have to be able to sort of, like you say, you have to have some of those elements because you that fear. And I know, for me, when it comes to writing reviews, usually it's my action ones that get more traction because the horror review ecosystem is much bigger, and they can be much harsher, I think, as well, on those kinds of things. And so, yeah, you almost, I guess, have to give them something at the end to kind of feel like they paid it off.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
Because I think what one of the other sort of films we were quite inspired by was The Shining as well, in terms of how it builds atmosphere. Because a lot of that film, for example, plays a lot with the different interpretations of sort of reality and what is in his mind, and then it all builds up, but then you have to have the kind of payoff as well. So for all that kind of atmosphere and tension building, you do need to kind of have a release valve. And so it was always important to us to obviously still have those moments of horror and those big payoffs, without going too overboard. But budget wouldn't have allowed us to go too wild anyway, so that was almost a blessing in some ways.
And were there considerations too in terms of where you were shooting, where how bloody you could get for certain scenes, or how much you could do in those spots?
I mean, I think for the convent itself, with the stone floors and stuff like that, somewhere like that's relatively easy to clear up and to clean. But for the museum sets, we shot in a few different sort of museums, and sort of the recreated different set pieces from the olden times. So I think there was two that we shot in that had a variety of different rooms, and you're some of it's mocked up, and then other bits, you're kind of like, those are authentic items from that time period. So in those sorts of places, you can't get too careless, because you're actually ruining an artifact or whatever if you get anything on it. But I mean, it's just the kind of usual, you put a clean bed sheet on the bed kind of thing if you're going to do anything there, and whatnot. But by and large, I suppose the convent provided quite a good location in that sense, and that a stone floor, you can chuck a bit of water down and everything's kind of cleaned up.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I think that's one of the things, right? I know, like Tom, with Renegades, where some of the locations you really couldn't shoot them up, and so they had to go with more computer effects and that kind of thing. And it probably helps if you are in a location that, like you said, you can kind of just run some water over it and clean it up, that you can use more practical effects in those cases.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, we have had a few instances, across the board in the productions where we've accidentally put holes in walls and whatnot that you just have to apologise for and pay for the repairs. I suppose it's just part of the hazard of allowing a film crew to to shoot on your property, kind of thing.
Yeah, and we both have a preference really for doing as much practically as you can as well. I mean, it is it's a lot quicker and it's a lot easier to just do everything in post, with plug-in effects and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, we would much prefer to do practical wherever possible.
Yeah, and I imagine too, from a safety standpoint too, like that probably computer maybe is an easier route to go than and so in these scenes you've got to really kind of block out some of the more the physical sequences and make sure nobody gets hurt and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I'll let Nathan answer that one as the on-set man.
I mean, I guess when you're shooting at a certain budget as well, you know, health and safety is obviously very important. I mean, you've got to make sure that the actors and whatnot are comfortable doing things, you know, whether that's in Baby in the Basket or anything else. But I mean, this was probably one of the first times that the cast, that was all kind of, you know, actors and not you know, we weren't getting kind of stunt people in or extras or whatever. So but you know, everyone was pretty game for it, and it's one of those things with enough rehearsal and, you know, just keeping an eye on everything and on set, you know, certainly Michaela and Amber that fight at the end kind of threw themselves into that, which is a difficult thing to do. You know, if people haven't had you know, stunt experience and whatnot. I mean, I think they both have had, you know, I think horror comes along with the sort of proviso that you do at some point have to do that kind of stuff anyway. You know, whether that's chasing or, you know, physical altercations or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that, yeah, because that scene does come off well. I know Mark Paul Gosselaar from Saved by the Bell, he was in an interview talking about the fight that he has with AC Slater on Saved by the Bell. And he was like, yeah, we had, you know, he's like talking about how since then, you know, he's done productions where everything's blocked out and there's like a stunt coordinator who's showing how to do everything. And he was like, yeah, they just told us, the two of us, to just wrestle, just get after it. And he was like, you know, I kind of threw the fake punch and then he gave me a real hip toss because he was a wrestler. And I was, you know, it was like, we felt like we were really fighting in that sequence. And so I imagine that's probably another thing too, where they're kind of throwing themselves into it and, you know, kind of getting it to look right, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's one of the things. You know, it's partly how you shoot it, but again, budget seems to kind of dictate partly as well, because obviously, you know, we don't have the time to shoot, you know, 20, 25, 30 takes of that. You know, if we're going to do stuff like blow up a car, we've got one and that's it. Whereas on something like Fast and Furious, they'll shoot it 7 times. There's 7 different cars, so um, I guess that plays into, you know, partly the time and the, you know, trying to be efficient on the production, but get something that looks good on screen as well.
Yeah, and I imagine that helps when you've got the cast involved being able to kind of nail it on fewer takes, that you can, you know, maybe either spend more time on some of those other pieces, you know, or yeah, you don't have to worry maybe as much, you know, like you said, and I guess yeah, if you're shooting in the 1940s at you know, at sort of a faraway location, you fortunately don't have to worry necessarily about car chases or things like that.
Yeah.
But you know, I think it one of the things about it, I think that I liked about that scene at the end with the kind of the fight with you know, Michaela Longden and Amber Doig is that you know, yes, it's sort of the payoff piece, right? That again, with a horror movie like this, you need that kind of thing. But there was kind of a sense too of like, you know, these were two nuns that were almost sort of throwing off the conventions of being a nun. They were just kind of going for it there. That I kind of also appreciated as well. That sort of like that throughout this movie, we've had this sort of construct of the convent that had been sort of restricting a lot of things and adding, you know, sort of making the interactions much more tense. And at this point in the film, all that was kind of gone.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it kind of boils down to the fact that you know, if anyone's pushed, you know, if anyone's put in a situation where they're in danger, they'll lash out in whatever way that it's the kind of survival instinct, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, you're taking these you know, highly religious, moral beings and putting them in a situation that's sort of out with their control. You know, ultimately anyone, no matter what their background's, probably going to do what they can to survive that. So for me, it didn't sort of you know, go too far beyond the realms of possibility, because, you know, talking about rationale, I imagine that eventually when you're placed in that scenario, that's how anyone would react, really.
Yeah, and especially, you know, Michaela Longden's character, that we get the sense maybe you just had a different past, you know, and like I said, she doesn't necessarily follow the rules, or she's not kind of, you know, sort of I don't want to say drinking the Kool-Aid, but right, she's not quite, you know, as bought in on the whole nunnery thing, that like she might be more likely to sort of step outside of that. And then of course, yeah, Amber Doig Thorne's character, who is the cultish one, is, you know, it's almost like a culmination where you can kind of see where that's going based on how the other character arcs went throughout the film.
Yeah, and I think Tom's intention was that you know, Michaela's character does have quite a checkered past, even beyond the alcoholism.
Yeah, it was just a sense of, yeah, again, like we wanted to have some of the characters kind of disconnected from the church at some point in their life, and they've kind of, through whatever circumstances, they found themselves there. Yeah, I mean, I kind of wanted this sense of, for many of their characters, it's about them losing faith, but for Michaela's character, it's about her finding it in the film.
Which I definitely think came through really well. I think, I mean, one of the interesting things that you do with her characters, you have her go back to the mainland, and I thought what was really good about that approach was that she's a very strong character, right? I mean, you can see in that opening sequence when they're at the dinner table together, and it's really hard for the other characters to sort of exist while she's there. She's sort of making snide comments, shutting a lot of things down. It's a lot between her and Mariam Dabo's character. But by having her go to the mainland, the other characters breathe and they sort of grow in that period. And then we bring her back into the situation of these other characters who have grown, and then she can still be this sort of strong character that she was. But now all the other characters are sort of strong or kind of built up as well. And I thought that was a really good approach to her character.
I guess there's a bit of a kind of spoiler element in there with the whole going back to the mainland thing to a degree, because obviously the ending's quite ambiguous, and we even discussed kind of several theories about what happened, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the audience actually picks up on, and what they notice or what kind of conclusions they come to themselves.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I think that's true too, right? Sort of how the film ends. Yeah, and I won't mention much about it either as well. But I think because I think this movie has enough twists and turns. Kind of similar to When Darkness Falls, where I mean they're two different movies, but they kind of both have that slow burn aspect of them. And then once that sort of that match starts to really kind of make its way down to your finger, and it really starts to get moving, yeah, you start to get things happening in ways that I think, again, it pays off for the audience to sort of go with it for that early part of the burn where the match is just first struck and it's starting to kind of slowly move its way down. For the audience to kind of sit there for that part of it and take all of it in, it definitely pays off that patience early on.
Yeah, definitely. I think that we were really intending for that to happen. So we're hoping it does, and we're hoping that the audiences respond well to it. But we also, we wanted to lay out a few nuggets and a few sort of clues and possibly red herrings. But there's certain elements in the film where we would like people to have their kind of own interpretation to what they think is happening, and the reasonings behind things. So yeah, we've kind of left some things a little bit kind of ambiguous. But yeah, hopefully hopefully that gets a good response from the audience, or something that invites them to kind of look back and watch the film again, maybe.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And I should point out when I say slow burn, what I mean is like it's not the sort of like a horror film where there's like a kill every 10 to 15 minutes that you sort of we get
Yeah.
tension and we get character development, we get some really tense and dramatic and interesting interactions earlier in the film. So I think that's another piece of why it works so well is that the things that are happening before we kind of get to where the match starts to burn down to your fingertips, that earlier part of it, there's so many different interactions that are really tense, but also really interesting, that sort of builds that. So I think that helps too, I think from an audience standpoint. But yeah, sometimes I think sometimes people, I know for me when it's an action movie, right, I want to see, a car flip in the first 10 minutes. And so sometimes I think horror fans maybe think the same thing, but I think the interactions are interesting enough and compelling enough that it kind of gets them through.
Yeah, I think we wanted. I mean, like you say, um, a lot of horror films will have a kill every 5-10 minutes. That would have been something, had we done it for a studio from the beginning, they probably would have insisted on everything kind of kicking off within 10 minutes and then someone dying every 10 minutes, having a big moment. But we were more interested in really approaching it, you know the perspective of making interesting characters, building atmosphere, and building up to something. We still had to think commercially to a point, but we didn't want to be completely driven by making it a commercial kind of film. We were trying to, very hard with, the budget available to make something interesting and something good.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think, the easy thing would have been, right, to kill somebody off early on in the film. And I think it's probably harder. And I think probably to your point about the studios, to trust the audience to say, oh no, there's enough tension in that opening dinner sequence, where the nuns are all sitting around the table and we're getting a sense of who everybody is. And Michaela Longden's having these tense interactions with Mariam Dabo's character. I think that's one of the things is the studios generally don't trust the audiences enough to allow for sequences like that to replace just, a nun maybe like running through a garden and being, killed by somebody with a mask on or something like that, right? That this is like,
Yeah.
no, we're not going to do that. And I think it's one of the realities, right? Is that, and I don't know if maybe the studios are right to maybe not trust the audience enough, but I think there is enough of an audience out there for sequences like, like I was describing, like the dinner sequence or some of the other tense interactions that you don't need to do a kill every 10 minutes. You don't have to rely on that to make the movie work.
Yeah, and I think almost the audiences are kind of coming back around to that sort of they want to see a story and they want to see characters as opposed to just something constantly happening. I mean, I don't know whether it's the sort of oversaturation of action blockbusters at the box office or whatever that people have become a bit jaded and a bit fed up with. But more recently, I've been noticing other films doing well at the box office or on streaming that would indicate in a sort of switch back to more story driven films. And for me personally, I would find interesting and tense scenes between characters more compelling, or would draw me in more than just constant bloodlust or action. I mean, don't get me wrong, I will sit down and watch a 90-minute Scott Adkins movie and it's great fun, but sometimes you just want to become engrossed in something.
Yeah, and I think if you ask Scott Adkins, right, he would say he would want to be able to do more too, right? Like he talks about how he gets mad if and I think he kind of uses this as a reason for why his dramatic scenes don't go as well, right? Because they only allow for like one or two takes, and he's like, well, I can only get it one or two takes. If I had more takes, I could do better. But he also, I think he's someone who will say, yes, I want to do the action. I'm good at the action, but I also wish I could have more dramatic moments. He likes to play American characters or German characters so he could show off his accents and things like that. And so I think even for the actors involved, they almost want a little bit more.
Yeah. No, I think that makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think again for the cast in this film, I think they also you could probably say the same thing, that they were the opportunity to do something more. They really ran with it, and then we as an audience can really enjoy that because I think it comes off really well.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, I think Tom's script gave every character, something to do, and every actor something to get their teeth into. Beyond just becoming fodder for a slasher or whatever.
Right, yeah, because that's a good point too, right? That if you're somebody in this casket and you see the script that Tom provides, and it's really just like, okay, you show up at the party and you're drinking from your red Solo cup or whatever, and you make out with one of the guys for 5 minutes, and then somebody stabs you, right? It's like you don't see a lot there, but then you look at this and you see a character arc that you can build on, a backstory and elements like that. It is you're probably going to get something more from that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was from basically day one, where we really wanted to make something that was led and would be interesting and compelling.
Yeah, and I think it works. I know when we first talked about this in 2023, when the idea was first coming, and I think like you mentioned that you'd had Elle and Michaela already cast and already were planning, and then you were sort of kind of working out the rest of the cast from there. I think at that point you weren't able to say that you had Mariam Dabo or Paul Barber yet. I think it was that early in the process. But I think at that point, that was kind of what the goal was for this. And so I think to see it on screen kind of, kind of realized as that, I thought was a really nice thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's rewarding to sort of see it kind of out there. I mean, in a week or so's time from now, so 5th of February, I think it is, it's opening in the Philippines on the big screens. And then then a couple of weeks later, obviously, it's the main release in the US and UK. But I mean, it's in terms of us kind of co-producing it as well, and kind of being in control, and having help with from Gary as well, Gary Collinson. It's been a really kind of long process compared to some of the jobs that I've done as writer for hire. It's been like a week, and I've handed off a script, and then I'm done with it completely. So this is completely the opposite, really. So the time that goes into it, from on all fronts, and the hard work and effort, it's just you want it to be right, and you want it to be good. So yeah, everyone's kind of put a lot of effort into it and kind of given it their A game.
Yeah, and I think that definitely comes through for sure. And I think that's the hard part, right? When you're working on a budget, is that sometimes you have to maybe make sacrifices, or there's certain things that you can't get exactly the way you want to. But I feel like in this film, at least it didn't seem like there's a lot there. I mean, if there the sacrifices that were made kind of are maybe in the background, they don't come through on the screen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we hope so. I mean, it's like everything really. We could have done with a few more days and a few more £1,000, but we kind of make the best of it. But I think sometimes when you've got certain limitations, you put more focus into the story. I think in terms of like studios and distributors at this level, sometimes their consideration is that there's not enough of say the action or the gore or whatever it might be. There's not enough kind of stuff happening, being kind of thrown in your face, where this is all the stuff that costs money. So if you add in more dialogue, that doesn't matter to them. Or if you add in character arcs, it doesn't necessarily matter to a lot of these studios. They just want to see more kind of bang for their buck, but there's not enough buck in the film. So yeah, we just focused on making the best film we possibly could, and then hoped that we would get kind of a good placement with it, and good distribution.
Yeah, one of the things that's unfortunate about the distribution is that, unlike like Cinderella's Revenge, which played in a theater here in Philadelphia, it would have been nice to have if Baby in the Basket was the same thing. I could not in Philadelphia; it's got in the suburbs, so it's a little bit of a hike for me without a car. But still would have been kind of cool, because I'm noticing that they kind of play movies like that a little bit more, kind of more low budget ones, or ones that have little distribution. So it's a shame it's playing in the Philippines, at least for I think we do have some audience there, that they can at least check it out in the theaters. But for the rest of us, yeah, we'll be able to catch it out on demand here.
Yeah, that's right. So it's coming to streaming, and also to DVD in the US and the UK. I mean, I guess part of the sort of it's obviously a big risk, even a limited theatrical. In fact, it's probably even a bigger risk, limited theatrical, as opposed to just having the sort of confidence in a film to go a bit wider. But it's a huge risk for distributors if they're going to exhibit something theatrically. And I think that the stuff like the IP and all the sort of the Disney stuff and the stuff that's coming into the public domain, there seems to be a greater confidence in that compared to original stories. Just like there's a greater confidence in sequels and remakes and reboots and spin-offs and whatever in Hollywood, I think there's a greater confidence in public domain material, because the public recognise it. So the distributors are of the view that there's almost like a built-in audience there, even if it's just purely out of morbid curiosity, which I think is true. But they're less likely to take a chance on something like The Baby in the Basket. But hopefully we'll find an audience on streaming.
Yeah, I mean, I think so for sure. I mean, you to your point about the IP situation, somebody made the comment that if Star Wars was pitched today as opposed to in the 70s, no studio would take it because it's a completely new concept and it wouldn't make any sense to anybody, and it's not based off anything else. And so, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about, right? That Star Wars, which is one of those legacy IPs that we think of now, couldn't be made today.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably true, to be honest. And I've heard of a few instances where scripts in Hollywood have started out as original projects, but then become a sequel, or they've been sort of molded into part of a franchise. And once you know that, and you watch those films, you go, oh, actually, that probably would have been better if it just existed on its own. But again, it comes down to the fact that no one really wants to take a risk anymore. But maybe the seemingly renewed interest in original stories and movies like The Substance, for example. Maybe that sort of renewed interest in originality will eventually lead to a different way of thinking in terms of what the distributors and the studios commission.
Yeah, and another one, that maybe that with that recent Nosferatu film, which is it's a period piece, so that's one similarity it has this. But actually, I think in terms of the film itself, it's been done really well here in America. But I think that one is kind of a little bit more style over substance. I think it's like the shots are really well put together in some cases. But then with Lily Depp, kind of the possession sequences it definitely looked off. And it looked like kind of like sort of like a direct-to-video Exorcist sequel or something like that. And I think that's one thing about this movie is that all of the performances feel organic, and it feels like nobody was asked to do anything that didn't come off the screen really well. And I hope that with something like a Nosferatu, that more audiences come to movies like The Baby in the Basket, and like it does, they can kind of see like, okay, Nosferatu, I really liked that one. It seemed like it was something different. Now I can do something like Baby in the Basket and even see something that's even better at that sense, that where the performances come off really well, and the dialogue is a little bit more organic and that kind of thing. And hopefully that'll kind of open up more doors.
Yeah, much, a little bit inspired by things like A24 and Neon, Mubi, all these kind of indie companies that are making more original content, and the audiences that are kind of rising and appreciating those kind of films, even if some of them are quite divisive. People are, talking about them and discussing them and kind of, looking into them. So yeah, we're hoping to kind of capture a little bit of that kind of more, I guess, discerning audience who want to see something that might be interesting to them.
Yeah, and I think for that, for the audience listening, I think this is definitely something, it's because of that the like you said, it's something that isn't just slashers, killing somebody every 10 to 15 minutes. It's not like, a ripoff of The Exorcist. I think that's another thing too, that like you talked about, where maybe if a studio got a hold of this script, they would have maybe molded it into like an Exorcist sequel or something like that. And it's not really any of those things. It takes inspiration from different things. It takes inspiration from different elements, but it is also it's its own thing in that sense. And I think the slow burn aspect of it works really well. And I think for horror fans who are kind of coming to horror movies and wanting something a little bit different, this definitely fits the bill.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's really good to hear. Hopefully the audiences will agree.
Yeah, well, now as we're wrapping up here, anything else that I may have missed in talking about the film that you guys wanted to mention?
I don't think so.
And no, I think we've covered everything.
Yeah, so excellent. Well, so for people listening, this episode, my plan is for it to drop probably on the 11th of February. So that means the 17th is when you'll be able to get Baby in the Basket. A big video on demand here in the States. Is it in the States and the UK as well, or just the States?
Yeah, no, US and UK both on the 17th. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's well worth people checking out. I know, I think I have a little bit more of a horror audience now because I was on the Lambcast podcast talking about that Nosferatu movie, and so I think some people have come over here from that. But also some of the other guests that I have on, some of the other listeners are horror fans, and I think, you know, for people that are looking for something new, but I think also too, just for people that aren't horror fans, this is a movie that sort of transcends that genre as well, in the sense that you've got really great performances, you've got a really great story that develops in a really organic way. The set looks really nice, you know, it all around really works. And so I think even just for fans that aren't horror fans, that are just looking for a nice movie to watch on a Saturday night, this is definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. Hopefully. I think it's one of those ones that you know, kind of thriller, horror, mystery, drama audiences. Hopefully, we've kind of got a bit of a combination of those in the bag with it.
Yeah, it definitely comes through there for sure. Yeah, and I guess in the meantime too, for people, you know, other films to check out from you guys. When Darkness Falls is on Tubi right now. Really great one to watch. Uh, Dead Before They Wake. You said that currently that's VOD, but that might be coming to Tubi soon, I think, or in the near future.
Yeah, so it's rent or buy at the moment, and on DVD in the US, and then it will hit Tubi and a lot of the other free movie platforms probably towards the start of March. So
Yeah, definitely. And then of course, Bank Holiday and Lock and Load, I think, are also on Tubi here in the States, for people that want to check those out. And that's kind of really fun action. Tongue in cheek also covers a lot of different tropes or cliches that happen in action, but does it in a really fun way. So those are fun ones for people to check out as well. And then Tom, Cinderella's Revenge is another one that we've covered on the podcast here before. That one's also on Tubi. So yeah, as you're waiting for Baby in the Basket,
Yeah.
there's other ones to check out, but definitely Baby in the Basket.
Yeah, definitely. I recommend it. I mean, I'm biased, but you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both for coming on. This was a lot of fun. And again, this movie, I really enjoyed The Baby in the Basket. I got to see, of course, I got an advanced screener of it, so I got to see it ahead of time here. But I really enjoyed it. I think the audience is really going to like it as well.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for checking it out, and thanks for having us on again as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Matt.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for coming on, and thank you for listening. We'll be back soon. Bye, everybody.
Direct